Hello and welcome to today's episode of Courage Permission Slip. I am your host, Kia, and today I have the great pleasure of welcoming a fellow coach, a fellow type A personality, Jess Wass, to the show. And before we dive in, I want to tell you just a little bit more about her. Jess is a career coach and consultant with expertise in high performance environments. She helps high achieving individuals craft intentional career paths. I love that determinant. And high performance organizations cultivate people-centric work cultures. Also really important right now. And Jess has been featured in publications such as the New York Times, Bloomberg Businessweek, and Thrive Global. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited to get into conversation with you today.
Ooh, I'm excited too. And before we dive in, I mentioned this in the introduction, but I want to officially congratulate you in a public setting on your New York Times feature. That was, when you made that post, I think I wrote on your post, I was like, I'm screaming right now. It was like, that was so exciting. And it just feels like, when one of us wins like that, we all win. So
Thank you for saying that. And I think it's so important, what you just shared, which is, I think the best part about it is, yes, I was mentioned in the New York Times, and that's just so meaningful. But the outpour of love and support that I got from my community for sharing that was way more meaningful. Just knowing that people have your back and that people can actually be happy for your success. And I think that's something I really try to embrace and come from an abundance mindset, that success for others doesn't take something away from me.
Yes.
And the more that I give, the more that other people can gain, and the more that I gain from it. So I was just it felt so good to sort of be wrapped in the warm embrace of the people in my community and knowing they were rooting for me and happy for me. And that's the energy I need to keep going.
Yes. It's so important. I'm glad that you shared that. And I'm glad that you said that you try to have an abundance mindset about this, because, one person's success doesn't mean it subtracts from yours, right? It's a reminder that it's possible for you too, because there's room for all of us, right? There's space enough for all of us. Because we all have different things to bring to the table. So really, really love that you shared that.
Yeah, thank you.
So also one other thing that I feel like it's important to talk about, because I feel like this is it's becoming less of a, scarlet letter, but there are all these parts of our personalities, of our lives, that sometimes we try to, put in a nice, neat little box and hide from the world, that we only open up when we're by ourselves or in our private homes or what have you. And I really love and appreciate that you share that, you have a type A personality. Hi.
Guilty.
Right. You talk about being a Libra, and you talk about your multiracial and your interfaith background. And so I would love for you to share how you use all of these elements of your life and your personality, how that helps you to be successful in the work that you do, as opposed to, subtracting that to, not show up fully.
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolution and a journey in embracing all the different aspects of me. And I think certainly in the first part of my career, I very much felt like I needed to compartmentalize the different aspects of me. And there were many work environments that I showed up in where I felt like people didn't appreciate or want to see, the other aspects of me that didn't represent the version of professionalism or whatever the case may be. And I've struggled with it, I think, for many years, and that I've always seen myself as this multifaceted person. I love psychology and I will geek out on the academia around it. And I love to watch reality TV. I love The Real Housewives. I learned so much about people and what not to do from watching that show. And now as a coach, as a consultant, when I do trainings, I bring that in. I'll show clips and say, what can we learn from what not to do here? And just being able to own that and say, that doesn't make me less than, that doesn't make me not credible of my expertise because I have these other interests. It really adds to it. To some, it makes me relatable. To others, it's meaningless. And then we move on from there. But I think it's important to integrate those parts. And, I think especially being multiracial growing up, it was very much about trying to navigate through different environments and trying to figure out where can I show up and what parts of myself do I want to show up with. Where in reality, when I started to really integrate all these different pieces, what I realized is the way I was raised and being between all these different worlds actually allowed me this really unique perspective to see multiple sides of a situation and not coming in with as much of a blinder on. And that's actually served me really well in my coaching and my consulting, to be able to bring people to the table and be that mediator, that Libra, right? Finding balance and trying to understand what's everyone going through, what's the organization and management thinking, and what are the line workers thinking? What are you thinking in this coaching conversation? And what might your manager or boss be thinking? And how do we start to bring that together to build the bridge of communication rather than being so polarized? And, in this environment we're in, it's very polarized as well. So trying to leverage that more and more, but more importantly, it's just so much less work to just show up and be your whole self, as opposed to like hiding pieces and feeling like you're living a double life or a triple life. And it's just so much more enjoyable. So thank you for recognizing that.
Yes. No, my pleasure. And I think, it is so important, right? And the thing is, and you talked about this, like for some people, it's relatable. Other people, it's like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, right? But in that moment, like that could be a point of comfort for someone, right? That could be a point where they feel seen and less isolated. If you are willing to be vulnerable and show, or like just peek into that aspect of your personality. And I love that you bring clips into meetings, because I've actually been in trainings where I'll bring in like my favorite memes, right? It's like, okay, so here, or like, as I'm like transitioning slides, instead of it just being like the boring, like, now here's what we're talking about in this section, it'll be like a GIF, right? Like my background will be some like crazy animated thing. And it just, first of all, it brings out a little chuckle, but it just gives a little bit more of my personality. And then
it's a window into you.
Right. And it brings people's guard down, right? Because it doesn't, it kind of, it feels like it diffuses that power dynamic, right? There's this feeling that the person that is teaching or coaching or speaking, that we're on this higher plane, that, oh, they must know more. And that's not the case at all. I mean, oftentimes, and I am willing to bet that you will agree with this, like we're on the same journey too, right? Like we may not be in the same exact place, but we've either been there or we're coming out on the other side of it. And it breaks down those walls of, oh, they know more than me. I don't want to seem stupid in front of them, right? I don't want to seem like I don't have it together. Like we're all in this together, actually.
Well, it's making it more accessible as well. And my career role models are people like, I mean, this is really advantageous, but like Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant, who I think take, really high level academia type concepts, and they make it so accessible by their storytelling, which is something I'm still working on, but their storytelling and making it accessible for every single person, no matter what your, educational background is, to understand it. And so that to me is like, I want to make this accessible. I want to be the bridge between, all the research is done in academia, and there really is a lack of connection between all the wonderful work they do out there and actually bringing it to the masses. In the master's program I went to, that was really what we were focused on, which is being that bridge and making that information practical. How is that going to work in my company today? And so I'm always thinking really practically and putting myself in the shoes of the employees and the manager and going, how it's not just about learning a theory. It's about, how is this meaningful to me in my life? And sometimes it's using a work example, and sometimes it's a Real Housewives example.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you.
Right. Love that so much. Well, and so what I hear is you give yourself permission to be all the things, right? And so I would love to start with you, Jess, about courage, and what does it, when you hear that word or see it, and and it's getting talked about a lot right now, but what does the word courage mean to you or for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a couple of components that come to mind. It's this idea of acting in the face of uncertainty in a way that is authentic to you and your vision. And I think the uncertainty part is really important, because uncertainty is a part of life. And we can play it safe or only do things when we know exactly what's going to happen on the other side. But the courage really comes in when you can take those actions and you're not exactly sure what might happen, right? We have hopes, we have dreams, we can lower risks, but we're not really sure what's going to happen. And doing that in a way that's authentic to you. And I've been having a lot of conversations right now on my social media with my communities about this idea of defining success for yourself, right? And really focusing and appreciating that what's right for me may not be right for another person, and how often we just do what the other person is doing. So I think courage really is being authentic to yourself and your wants and your needs and your strengths and what's important to you, and being able to identify it, say it, and then do something about it. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I think if you can do it, it can be really rewarding.
Yeah. And not only that, but, and you mentioned this earlier when we were talking about you in particular, it can be freeing, right?
Yeah.
Because I, like you, this is a topic, defining success for ourselves is something that, when I kind of like really got my bearings in the coaching world, that was really where I found myself netting out as starting the conversation of, well, that doesn't feel right for me, actually. Like that's like, oh, like I'm trying to force this round peg that is me into a square hole, and it doesn't work, right? And then you start feeling all of that self-judgment of like, I'm not far enough along, I haven't had enough wins, right? I haven't done, I don't have enough experience, right? And so when I am coaching leaders, when I'm speaking to leaders and we're talking about this, while I expect it, oftentimes I'm surprised at how locked in people are to what success looks like, right? And I really, really love how you made the special point of saying, moving forward in a way that's authentic to you, right? Like one of the places that I start is with a values assessment.
Yes.
And again, like this is something that always blows people mind, and it goes hand in hand with the success definition, right? Like the two. So I really, really love that that's how you described what courage means to you, because I think if people did that intentional exploration more, people would feel more free, would feel a little bit more like, okay, like I can do this, and I can do it in the way that I want to do it, that feels right for me.
Yeah, I never would have made it to where I am right now if I didn't have that hard conversation with myself about how do I define success, and challenging that notion and getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable in that conversation. I started my career in finance. I was interning at Lehman Brothers all through college, and my parents were so excited for me. They said, you're a woman of color working on Wall Street. That's so prestigious. And I looked around and didn't see many Black women. So I was like, yeah, this really is prestigious for someone like me. But I didn't get it. I didn't love it. I wasn't excited by it. I was like, I don't think this is it for me. And I made small movements along my career where I was like, well, maybe it's not finance, maybe it's consulting, right? Which is, a move. It's not a big move, but it's a move where I was like, okay, maybe my definition of success is as a consultant. And then I got there, I was like, maybe it's internal strategy at a corporation. And I did that for a while and liked it, but still was playing around with this idea. But in the back of my mind, the things that always really excited me and drew me was thinking about the people in an organization. How do I help and train people? The culture of the organization, figuring out how to bridge communication gaps between people. Like that's where my focus was. And I said, well, all that function sort of lives in HR. And I had many different wrong ideas around what it would mean to move from I am a strategy consultant or I'm, head of strategy here to being in HR. And as I looked at people around me who were quote unquote successful, none of them worked over there. They were all in finance and strategy. And I was weird for even having left those. So I really had to come to terms with, well, what does success mean to me? And is it more than just a title and a company with some panache around it? It took me many more years to still learn this lesson because then I moved on to startups because that's flashy and exciting. And now I lead operations or I'm the head of, the whole East Coast for this company. And that sounds great, but I'm miserable on a day-to-day basis. So how great could this really be?
Yes.
So it's really, that was important to me to really confront that and say, forget all that. Success to me is if I do something that I'm excited about and I think actually leverage my strengths and really, use them on a day-to-day basis, I bet I can do even better. Right. And so, yeah.
So Jess, I want to kind of shine a fine light on a couple things that you said. First, and I hope I don't forget my second point, but when you first talked about the transitions that you made,
right,
while still trying to be in the corporate environment, right? Like going from finance to strategy and then oh, maybe it's this other thing. But you mentioned that, it was weird, right? Where did the weird judgment come from? Were you actually hearing from people, or was it that kind of internal bargaining that you were having with yourself of, well, this is what I feel like I should be doing, but this is the thing that feels a little closer to being my definition of success? Where did the weird judgment come from?
Yeah, I think it ties back to our first conversation around integrating the pieces of oneself. And I very much felt in all of those environments, there was a piece of Jess that was showing up, but there were many other parts of Jess that were just sort of underutilized. And those are the pieces where I was like, well, this is what I'm really good at. And so it was feeling like there are things left on the table that I'm being forced to operate, not necessarily from my strengths, but just do things that were less interesting, that came less easy to me, which is fine if I want to learn how to do those things, but I wasn't that interested. And so the weirdness was an internal, I think, feeling when I referenced that around, this doesn't feel right. But I also don't have any role models for the things that I'm actually interested in. So I don't even know how to do that or how it exists. And I always say, use envy, not jealousy, to guide you. Envy says there's something about that that's drawing me in, and jealousy is like, I don't want you to have that. So envy can be helpful. And that was actually helpful for me along the way to get, sparks of inspiration where I was like, that person, something about that person and what they're doing that's exciting me.
Oh, I really, really like the distinction that you just shared between jealousy and envy. And you hit the nail on the head, because that envy is that signal that, oh, there's something else that I want. Let me dip my toe in that pool and see what that's about, as opposed to this really hard line of man, they have it, but I don't want them to have it. Right.
Right. Or I should have it versus them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
you know, that abundance mindset we talk about, everyone can have it.
Yeah.
Everyone get
Right. Right. But so going on this envy trail, Jess,
it.
what was the thing, right? So you moved from finance to strategy, and then now you started looking at this other, like the people piece, right?
Yeah.
What was that? What permission did you have to give yourself? Because I mean, ultimately you went back and got your master's,
Right.
but what was that like? What was the inflection point where you finally were like, this is going to be the thing that's going to help me to really leverage my strengths and what gives me energy? What was that permission?
I think it was a couple of things. I think one of them was that envy. Earlier in my career, one of my college friends who, you know, I had a lot of respect for, I saw that she had left corporate law to go into coaching. And I was like, that's interesting, right? Because that's someone coming from this prestige background, a traditional success, right? And doing something that's different.
Yeah.
And the envy was like, I want to do that. That's kind of what it was like the secret. Me was like, ooh, that's what I wanted to do. And I spoke to her about it and had that in the back of my mind. And then it was still probably like 5 to 7 years later before I came back around and I saw Claire Wasserman, who runs Lady Gets Paid. And it was again at that moment where I was like, this is a job. Like you can, you know, we're similar in age and in background to some extent. And so I was like, oh, this is someone who's sort of like me, who's doing this thing. So this is actually like a path. I can do this. What would it look like to do that? And then starting to play that in my head. And that was happening in the background, I think, of me also having some mindset shifts and moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset was really empowering for me. I had always defined with success having to be, you know, the best and also being afraid of failure, right? And fear of failure will really keep you trapped from trying new things.
Yeah.
So it was very much, I need to stay on these paths because while I'm uncomfortable, they're at least familiar. And what would it look like if I did something else and it didn't work out, right? And so having to confront that and say, well, how can I move to like this mad scientist approach? So a mad scientist where it's like, I can take that scientist psychology background, right? And I can just run experiments where I don't have to take big leaps.
Yep.
I can take small little experiments. And that was really freeing for me. And then part of it too was, I call it letting go of this idea of the job soulmate, the career soulmate.
Ooh.
Because with those different parts, you know, we talked about I have all these different parts I was trying to integrate. I'd always had these different, very different interests, right? So I did well in the corporate world and playing those corporate roles. And then there was a piece of me who really liked this coaching and, you know, consulting, organizational development lens. And then there was a piece of me who was like, maybe I'll go to Hollywood and be a producer, right? So like very different aspects. And I kept being like, I have to choose one. I have to choose one. Which of these is my soulmate? And at a certain point, I said, what if I can choose any of them?
Yeah.
Right? What if I can choose any of them and I'll be happy in either of them? And it's just picking one to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was freeing. And it was like, okay, then I picked psychology. I'm going to go back and get my master's in psychology. And I'm not going to quit my job or anything. I was able to do an executive master's program, right? So I could take some risk without all of it. I didn't let go of my whole life. And then every time you take a step forward, it creates new choice points for you, right? And so it's following those breadcrumbs where I wasn't going to quit my job when I started. Now I'm in it. And now there's new opportunities for me. So now it becomes a possibility that feels less risky because I have other things that didn't exist when I started. So it's all these things. I know I threw out a bunch of things out there, but all these components.
Yeah. And, this is I mean, this is so rich, Jess. But you tapped into something that I think is really important, which, you know, knowing what I know about coaching, I can guess what the unlock was. But, you know, you talked about how the mindset shift from going from a fixed mindset to more of this growth, expansive mindset. allowed you to see that when you take a step, right, like not blowing up your whole life,
right,
that's an option, but it doesn't always work, right? But just by taking a step, then that opens the door to this new set of choices, these new set of opportunities. What was the thing that helped you to make that mindset shift from being fixed of this is the way it has to go, this is my career soulmate, to, oh, well, you know what? I could just step to the side a little bit and test this out. And oh, now I see. What was that thing that helped you to move from fixed to more of an expansive or growth mindset?
There was one, I think, point in particular that I remember. It may not solve all of this, but I think was really influential for me. And it was a book. I read the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, PhD. So she teaches at UPenn as well, and she's fantastically brilliant. But the premise of the book is not that earth-shattering, but I had an awakening reading it. And it's this idea that the more effort is what leads to success, not innate talent and ability.
Ooh, yes.
And I realized while reading this book that somewhere along the line, I lost that love for learning and just acquiring information and trying, and really started to follow this path of like going to what feels easy, because that fixed mindset was keeping me from trying new things or experimenting. And when I said, okay, if hard work, and I realized that actually what I did earlier in my life was that. It wasn't that I was the smartest kid in the class naturally. Yes, I have some great, above average IQ, but there was a lot of me putting in a hard work to try and keep up with the top kids in the class. And I could outwork and outsmart people that way. And bring in all these other skills that they didn't have, like social skills and whatnot. So it was bringing all the whole self to it. And I realized that I had lost that along the way. So I said, what if I just try something and actually put in the work? I could get good at it. So saying like, I don't know how to do that is no longer an excuse. It's, do I want to try to do that? And do I think if I tried, I would figure it out? And the answer was, yeah. And when I directed that towards psychology, I said, that's an area I've always loved. I've been reading on my own. If I actually got trained more in it from an academic standpoint and actually threw myself in it, I'm sure that wherever I end on the other side, I will be successful because I can outwork people, right? And that's what I can bring to the table. And so I think that was a large piece. And there was definitely a click in my head when I read that book, and I really started to rethink a lot. But it's also a lot of, you need to take the time to do that introspection, because it's a lot of working internally once you have that click to then move all the pieces together so you can take that momentum and move forward into action.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I love that you said that, because that's an important reminder that when you have the click, when you have the aha moment, when you have the revelation, right? There are two things that you have to decide or choose to be open to. The first is when you get that click, it's not automatically done for you, right? Like there's still things that have to happen once you've made the decision. But also to remember that just because you have had the aha moment, the click, the revelation, it doesn't mean that you have to take the step immediately. It doesn't mean that you have to like flip the table and it's like, well, now this is the revelation. Now I have to do something about it. No, you don't. Sometimes you just need to sit with it, right? Sometimes you just need to recognize like, okay, so that feels like the right thing for me to do, or that feels better to do than what I'm doing right now, right? Like sometimes the revelation just needs to be the revelation for a minute.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that also hits on a really important point, that change doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And that it takes, my plan from that click to being in the New York Times was literally 5 years. And I had planned at that point, at least a 2 to 3 year change plan. And I think people want change to happen immediately. And when you embrace, again, this grit mindset, this growth mindset, it's, I want to keep putting in the work and keep planting seeds that hopefully will sprout and give me new options and new opportunities. So take that click, and then you don't have to take action. You can put together a plan. That's small actions over time, but it will take time.
Yeah. Ooh. So, I mean, God, that can be a whole episode in and of itself of like what happens when you get the revelation versus when you actually start putting the plan together, right? And the plan can sometimes be a series of conversations with people that are doing something like what you want to be doing. And I heard this the other day in a conference that I went to, where the person speaking was like, take messy action, right? Like just do something, right? If you have this thing that you're thinking about, like, you don't have to have it put into like a nice, neat, Google Slides deck, right? Like sometimes it can be, a messy Post-it note with like some notes of like, oh, is this what I want to do? Who do I know that does this, right? Like that can be the plan to start with, but it's just starting, right? So I love that so much.
Cantor's law says all change is a mess in the middle.
Ooh.
And when you're in it, it feels like nothing's happening. And that's where that mindset shift is really helpful. There's a mindset called gain thinking versus gap thinking. Gap thinking is just looking at where I am and where I'm trying to go and just be like, not there yet, not there yet, not there yet. And gain thinking is, okay, look at where you want to go, but then turn around. Where did you start? Right. And the more that you can focus on those small wins and tracking the small steps that you've taken, the progress, the better off you'll be in getting through to the other side.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is my favorite. Love,
I told you we could talk. We could geek out for hours.
I know. And I didn't say this, but as a psychology nerd, like I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, one of my many professions that I was considering pursuing. But, my major was advertising, and a lot of advertising and marketing, there's a lot of psychology that goes into that. So it felt
it's
like
consumer behavior.
Yes. And so that felt like, but I mean, like I still have my psychology, textbooks. So this is all the way my jam.
Yeah. Well, also something that I've realized is sometimes you don't know what's possible. So I was a psych major undergrad and I thought about getting my PhD, but I spent time working in psychology research labs and I hated it. It was like in these tiny rooms with these very white walls. And it was like just running experiments, which is really boring. And one experiment, I was managing pigeons. Others were humans, older adults. And it felt so boring. And when I went into my master's program, I was like real excited by the work I did. And I went up to the head of the department who's been working for, 50 plus years. And I said, I thought all psychology, experimentations and research, because it was research that turned me off to psychology. You have to publish or perish. And I just found the research really boring. And I said, I thought research had to happen in the lab, and they were doing all this research by just like consulting in organizations and running a survey basically. And I said, I didn't know that it could be like that. He said, yeah, not all research has to be done in a lab. So sometimes you don't even know what's possible because you haven't seen it before. And that becomes a limiting belief.
Right.
And so really taking stock of what is it that I like. And I wish I had asked more questions back then, although I'm happy for the path that I took because that ended me up somewhere really interesting. But learn from my mistake, ask questions. If there's something you're interested in and something you don't like, ask yourself if it has to be that way or if there are other possibilities.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Love that question of, does it have to be this way? What could be another way? Oh, this is where coaching comes in very handy. And your journey to coaching sounds very similar to, or actually your journey to psychology sounds very similar to mine, but that's another story for another day.
We'll have that offline.
Yes. So you talked about some of the fears that had come up for you in terms of why you didn't take steps or do
Mhm.
more exploration right away, the fear of failure and how that
Mhm.
holds people back. So now that you're in a place where you're, kind of operating on all cylinders right
Mhm.
now, are there areas where you noticed fears pop up, and what are they?
Ooh, get maybe real vulnerable now. Yes, there are now new fears, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think of myself as a super, got it together person, and I do in many
Mm-hmm.
components. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm still working on things as I am now at this new place in my life.
Yeah.
And for me, I think the fear that's popping up recently is fear of success, being too successful. And it's,
Mm.
when I think back about some of the most painful aspects of my prior careers,
Mhm.
it was constantly being overworked
Mhm.
and having no control over that workload and those schedules. And I'm a person who needs routine and schedules and structure. And I found that in my career where I can create a lot of structure that works with and talk about with my clients, working with your energy,
Mhm.
understanding what works best for you. My
Mhm.
schedule's arranged in a way where I'm maximizing my productivity and it feels good.
Mhm.
And I've gotten New York Times, great, gotten really busy, a lot of requests. And my
Yeah.
biggest fear is slipping back into that place where my life is not my own, right? Where you're too much work. And I know the importance of rest and taking breaks. I just wrote an article about that. So, I know all these things. So I'm still struggling with where's the line for
Yeah.
me and not getting in my own way where I'm blocking success,
Mhm.
but creating what does my version of success look like? And it
Mhm.
doesn't need to be a, multi-million dollar business. We'll take it, but it doesn't need to be that.
Yeah.
And so I'm still playing around with, what what do I want right now?
Yeah.
And being open to what I want at this moment on this specific date may be
Mhm.
different than what I want a year from now, 5 years from now, as I have other things going on in my life.
Sure, sure. Um, this is the fear of success is not something that I think people think about
Mhm.
as being like, why would I be afraid of that? But,
Right.
you mentioned a couple of the reasons, like what's underneath that, right? Like your
Mhm.
schedule not being your own, not
Mhm.
being able to like have your hands on things. And I can really relate to that, especially of this new season that I'm stepping into, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, like, can I handle this?
Right.
And when I'm in conversation with people about the fear of success, which again, the first reaction is, what? Like, why would you be afraid of that? Why
Mhm.
would I be afraid of that? Um, but when you start breaking it down, it's all these things that come with it, like you said, your life not being your own, but then
Mhm.
also the higher up you get, the bigger of a target you become,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And, that could be like the too successful thing. And then can I handle that? Right. Like when
Right.
I'm, because inevitably someone from the cheap
Mhm.
seats is going to throw a shot. Right.
Mhm.
And then it's like, ooh, can I deal with that? What's that going to be like? Oh my God, I don't want that. Right. And so there are all these things of like, I want that. And ooh, but what happens when I get it? And will it be okay? And, what's going to happen to my life as I know it? What's going to happen to the people that I'm
Yeah.
already in relationship with? Like, how is that going to change? Does that resonate with you also?
Oh, 100%. And it's really with success, things do change.
Yeah.
And the question is, what changes and what do you want to change? So
Mhm.
something that I'm using to help combat those fears and function, right, is
Mhm.
going back to my values,
Yeah.
right? What did I say is most important to me? And that is something that brings me back time and time again. Everyone has their own,
Mhm.
shtick and spirituality or,
Yeah.
crystals or horoscopes or whatever. It's like, what is the thing that brings you back to center? Like
Mhm.
my center is my values. What is most important to me? Because
Mhm.
not everything can be important to you. You have to prioritize. So
Yeah.
what did I say is most important to me?
Mhm.
And then also knowing, not getting like 40 steps ahead of myself,
Yes.
which is really looking, coming back to the present and saying, what's in front of me right now? And what is the small change that I can make now to adapt to what's changed? Yeah. And that's helped me immensely. Looking ahead is helpful. I have clients where this is like their strength is being futuristic and looking ahead and anticipating all the problems. But if you get stuck then on living in all those problems and being in that anxiety, that's not helpful. But if you can look ahead, peer into the future, and then come back and say, what's one thing I can do today that will make that harder for that terrible thing to happen? And I did that at the end of last year, where I said, I'm getting in my way. When I get too busy, when I have too many inquiries, I freeze and I don't respond to anyone. And that's not helpful, because what usually happens is not all those inquiries pan out. And then I've made it where I've gotten no new business, and I thought I was going to have too much new business. So I need to take myself out of the equation in certain components. And so I had a new system that I use where things can be more automated, where when things get busy, I can't actually interrupt the process until a certain point. And that's actually been really helpful. And I'm seeing it in real time, like, oh, that was a smart thing to recognize. How am I getting in my own way? And what's one small thing that I can do that'll help combat me? Right? I'm a big superhero movie watcher, and I just had, those shows where like the villain turns out to be their own clone. And so that's the image that came to mind, which is like, I'm combating myself. I'm fighting against, alter ego Jess, who's trying to keep you safe.
Absolutely. And, and that's one thing, I mean, this conversation is so timely. You have no idea. But, that is one thing. So in my coach training, we talked about the shadows and how we
call it saboteurs of mind. Yeah.
Great. So you get where I'm going with this, that, all of these parts of ourselves, or these different shadows, they really do have a noble purpose for us. But the way that purpose manifests is
very unhelpful.
These very unhelpful, very unproductive, can really be anxiety inducing. But when you can recognize that and take a step back and say, okay, this doesn't feel great. And I wonder what this part, this shadow is trying to tell me. What does this shadow, or what does this part want for me? And when you can take that approach, it shifts your relationship with those fears, or with those parts, or with those shadows. And when you can give voice to those things, to say, what are you afraid of, part, what, hey, saboteur, what is it that you really want from me that I'm not seeing? Right. And so when you can have that quick, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out, 30-minute conversation with that part. Right. But if you can do that quick check-in of what do you want from me? What do you need me to know right now? That can really be the thing that, one, kind of takes away the power of that fear that's popping up. And as you said, it brings you into the present of, okay, what is it now that I know what's at stake here? What's something that I can do about this? What's one thing that I can do to shift this so that the part is on my side, the fear is on my side, as opposed to powering against me? So I love this conversation. I love that you brought that up.
I mean, you're 100% right with that whole approach and how we think about, these saboteurs, these shadows. They're trying to help us. They're trying to protect us, but they're doing it in a way that's not advantageous to us at this moment. And recognizing it is the first step. Recognizing that, oh, this isn't me right now. This is this other component. And I always relate it sometimes to Harry Potter. And there's a creature called the Bogart, which basically inhabits your biggest fear. It takes the form of that biggest fear. And just by recognizing that's not actually it, it's a manifestation of that. And, the key to defeating the Bogart is laughter, right? Just laughing at it, it takes the power away, the sting away. So it's a little bit of oh, that's control freak Jess, who's getting way too ahead of herself. Okay. calm down there.
Yeah.
And just saying, all right, I hear you. We don't want to get overwhelmed. Okay. So I gotta put some processes in place to make sure I don't sign up, 100 people when I only have 90 spots.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Jess, you talked about how you had done some work in organizing at the end of the year, right? Because that overwhelm started taking over. Now in this new year, and even more is starting to come your way. Where are you needing to or planning to give yourself permission to prepare yourself for this next season that you're stepping into?
Yeah, it's constantly, creating a hypothesis around what do I think that I want and how I think I'm going to get there. And then it's also pushing myself to not be so stubborn in this is the way it has to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, as I was entering the year, I said, I like what I'm doing. I want to keep doing what I'm doing, keep working alone in what I'm doing. I don't want to grow and hire 15 people. And that's not for me right now. And then as I enter this year, I start to go, well, is there another way? And am I assuming that getting some help is going to create, all of a sudden now I'm back to where I was 10 years ago working in these companies and completely underwhelmed and it's too complicated trying to get everyone on the boat. So questioning those beliefs and go, well, maybe there is a way for me to get some help, for me to test it out, right? What's a low stakes way of testing? And I had a call this morning with someone where I was just opening my mind to maybe there is another way. What would that look like?
Yeah.
And I'm going to challenge myself to test it, right? I have this idea. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's be too hard. All right, put your money where your mouth is. Let's try it, right? And I push myself sometimes to just say, okay, that's a nice thought, but can we come back into reality? And why don't we see if that's actually true? Right? I imagine myself this high stake poker game and I'm like, all right, put your money where your mouth is, right? I'm going all in.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'm like, oh, you know what? My bad. I was wrong. Okay, cool. That's fine. And just being open to telling myself I was wrong. That's okay. And that's that growth mindset. I learned something new. I'll integrate that knowledge and I'll keep moving forward. And I do not beat myself up for being wrong. And I do not get fearful of learning something new and changing the way that I, am thinking about things. Because again, my values are guiding me, making sure I'm not making these decisions that no longer serve me, but I'm being open about the way it has to happen.
Yes. There's more than one way.
Yes.
There's
and that's
more
what I tell
than
managers.
One way.
Tell your team the goal, tell them the guardrails, and then don't dictate the specific path they need to take. Because that's when you're taking autonomy away from people and nobody wants a job, not nobody, but many people don't want a job where they're just told to do this and follow it this way.
Right. So. Right. Yeah. Giving people some freedom to say, okay, I know where I need to get to. Now let me figure out what's going to work best for me, for my workflow, for the way that I learn and process information. Absolutely. Yes. That is, I'm getting ready to do a training for leaders. And that is 1000% going to be one of my modules. Is like, okay, here's how you do this with your people, right? So I love that you shared that. And that's the mindset that you are taking on, the questions that you're asking yourself to see, how else could I do this? How else can I achieve this goal that I have for myself that, oh, by the way, I didn't think was going to be a goal. And now all of a sudden, here we are.
I was reading Adam Grant's new book that came out in the last year, Think Again, I believe the name is. And it's all about, we can be confirmation bias. We could be so set on something and then we don't want to change our mind. So I'm really trying to challenge myself to just be open to thinking again about the things that I thought that I knew. And just challenge and see what else is out there and not being afraid of failure. So if I'm wrong, did I create this experiment where the pain is small, right? Where if there's a financial investment, it's a small loss, or it's not that big a loss because I got something, but not exactly what I wanted, right? So it's taking those small steps. It's like we talked about in the beginning, when that light bulb goes off, you don't have to, throw everything out and start over. It's okay. What's the next step? What's one step forward?
Yeah. And that, I mean, really that's I feel like that's your answer to my last question, but I'm going to ask you to actually, there is one other question I want to ask you, but let me get this in first.
Okay.
So, for that person
Mhm.
that is listening to this and it's like, Kia, Jess, that's all fine and good, but this doesn't apply to me. But I feel like there is a basic place where everyone can start, everyone who has a dream, a goal, a vision, an idea, right? Like, we don't need to know what it is. But for that person that has that idea for their life, for their career, what have you, but fear has become too important. The fear has become too big. And so they're just stuck, right? They're paralyzed. What guidance do you want to bottom line for that person to take action?
I think it may be what you think it was going to be, which comes to mind, and is, what is one small thing that you can do to get more information? We're not making any decisions. We're not making any commitments, but what's one step forward that you can take to just gather more information or test your thought or thinking process? And we'll make no other commitments from there. But I promise you, if you take one step forward and you just see what else you can do there, right? What else is possible there? All of a sudden, there'll be another option that opens up for you there. And just keep following the path. Just keep following those breadcrumbs, see where it leads you. And then make a decision later. Because I promise, when you're down the road and you make that decision, it's going to feel completely different to make the decision there versus where you are right now.
That is so, that distinction that you shared of taking a step is so, just powerful. Of take a step to just get more information, right? And that could be Googling, it could be sending an email, it could be sending a text to someone to say, I don't know if you're the right person to talk to about this, but I feel like you're in the realm.
I did so many of those.
Yes.
And they're helpful because that person will then send you slightly, to the left. And then that next person will send you even more to the left, right? It's little turns. Big changes are made up of small little tweaks and turns.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for all the insights that you shared. Just so many gems, and this has been so life-giving for me. But I'm going to add a little bonus question.
Great.
And it was something that you mentioned earlier that, literally this conversation has come up a couple times just in the last, probably 24 hours. Of, you remember this version of yourself at the early part of your career. And then you were kind of looking at yourself, pre where you are, but it was kind of like that middle point. And you mentioned earlier about how you recognize that something happened between that person you were at the beginning of your career and how something along the way dimmed or started to weigh you down, that you didn't feel free or courageous enough to take that step. Can you put a finger on what happened along the way? I think back to, I don't know, it was some meme that I saw on Instagram, probably 3 years ago at this point. And I did a video about it, and it was mind blowing for people. And this meme was, who were you before the world told you who you should be?
Oh.
And when you see that, that prompt, and you just you fall back in your chair oh, wow. So I'm curious to hear from you. First of all, does that resonate? Because I did see a reaction on screen.
Yeah.
Does that resonate? And can you put a finger on what happened to you between where you started and where you got to, that you were can I move forward from here?
Yeah, and that meme that you just mentioned, who were you before the world told you that you couldn't be you or whatever. I mean, that definitely got even like an emotional reaction like that hit me to my core. And it's sad to think about that the world can have this effect on you. And it's, it's small microaggressions. It's moving through the world as a multiracial person and feeling like you're constantly living between worlds, not connected to either. And it's, people sort of dimming your life or light and telling you like you're too much, or, just trying to put you in a box. And this iteration of who I am now is me like not dimming my light for anyone. And I'm shining and people are appreciating it and they're moving towards the sunlight and it feels good to them. And it's like, I almost don't even want to go back to that place, but it was definitely lots of little moments, lots of big moments of just feeling misunderstood, feeling like ideas and whatnot, it didn't fit in the way that people wanted it to. And I had a lot of great experiences too. I mean, my time I worked at Starwood was actually wonderful because there were a lot of people who saw my light, and even if it didn't fit what they originally wanted me to do, would allow and encourage me to go and try other experiences and really leveraging my strengths wherever those were. And that was really meaningful. And then there are many other instances where you just sort of keep getting shut down and feeling like people are rejecting parts of you. And you sort of close in on yourself, and getting to a point where I would keep asking myself, like, what's wrong with me? And I go, I like me. I think I'm actually really great. So what's happening here? And if I thought I really was a huge jerk who needed to change, I would do that. And I was a huge jerk much earlier in my life and changed because I didn't like that. That's not who I wanted to show up as. So I'm not immune to a change or looking at myself in the mirror and asking, but I was looking at myself in a mirror and going like, no, like this doesn't feel right. I know that, I have a lot to offer here. And I don't know what it was, but I guess after 10, 15 years, you kind of just get sick of that feeling and you hit a breaking point. And I always say, even with coaching, you can't coach someone who doesn't want to be coached. People have to hit that pain point on their own, which is a little sad. I'd like to think about how do we reach people earlier. Maybe that's a lot of mental health. We won't go there, but sometimes like you have to hit rock bottom before you can go enough is enough. And again, it's not throwing everything out, but it's going, I have to take some step. What's some step that I can take that will make me feel like I can take back control over this and get out of the shadow and the darkness. And that process was not quick, and it was not easy, and it didn't even look like you're out of the shadows. But I think about where I am right now and I go, dang, what an incredible journey. And I'm so glad that I just kept moving forward, even when I couldn't quite see the light on the other side.
Yes. Oh, I feel that in my heart, Jess. I mean, really, really important and helpful insights. And I mean, we didn't even go down the microaggression route, because I remember a blog post that you did, I think at the end of 2020, that, you and I went back and forth on. And I mean, like that spoke to me too. So maybe that's another episode, but I really, really appreciate that exploration, and something that you said about clients, right? Like, as a coach, sometimes I find myself wanting change, wanting progress more than my clients wanted. And I've actually said to some clients, like, it doesn't hurt bad enough for you yet, unfortunately, right? Like I feel like the parent, right? Like, parents want to protect their kids from hurt, but sometimes you have to get hurt before you're like, oh, okay, not doing that again. In fact, my husband and I were just talking about this the other day, right? Like, sometimes you have to like get burned a little bit before you're like, well, not doing that to myself again. But as a coach, my hope is that I can like help you learn from my mistakes, all the things that I ignored, all the red flags that I blew past in my career. But yes, unfortunately, that is true, in that sometimes for people and organizations, right? Like, I mean,
organizations.
I know you're in conversation with people. I certainly have been in conversation with people where it's like, well, so it doesn't hurt bad enough for you yet. So when you're
Mhm.
ready, I wish
Yes.
I wish you knew that it was time now, but I can't make that decision for you. I can't want it more than you want it for yourself, or than you want it for your team or your company, or et cetera. So I really, really love that you shared that, and that, as coaches and consultants, and we have to take that stance, right? Like
Yeah.
and it's easier said than done, that we don't like let our like personal feelings, but that would
We're
be
human.
us. Exactly. We're human beings, and that would be us not showing up fully, right?
Right. It's like we want to help. That's why we're
Yes,
here and that's
right.
why we're showing up. So it's
Exactly.
painful when you're like, I can help you, but you're not quite there. And I have
Right.
to remind myself, how do we start this? What everyone gets to
Mhm.
define success for themselves. So everyone gets
Mhm.
to define the path forward. And what
Yep.
I would do
Yep.
to fix this is not what someone else would do. And
That's right.
sometimes when I stop myself and I listen hard enough,
Mhm.
I realize, oh, they actually don't need that. What
Yeah.
they're doing is actually fine. And
Yeah.
creating like at least that parent boundary where it's like, okay, I'll let you figure this out on your own, but I make sure you
Mhm.
don't fail too hard.
Yeah. 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 Oh, just literally, like, this could be like a 3-hour conversation, but
We'll come back. We'll keep
we'll
doing
come
this.
back. We'll come back. But I want to thank you so much. I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation together.
Yes.
This has been soul filling. So thank you so
Same.
much, Jess.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And I mean, we could just talk for hours, but I feel reinvigorated for my day right now. And I'm excited to retackle things now, even with this
Yeah.
new lens from our conversation. So
Yes.
thank
Yes.
you.
Me too. Me too. So Jess, for people who want to get in touch with you and learn
Mhm.
more about you, how can they get in contact with you?
Great question. First, you can go to my website, jesswass.com. I have a lot of free resources on there. I write a lot of posts, which is my way of trying to provide some free resources to
Mhm.
people to help.
Mhm.
So feel free to utilize them. You can also submit inquiry forms to me if you want to connect with me for anything. And then also follow me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me, Jess Wass. And I'm also on Instagram. For those fun conversations as well. My handle is at jwass24. So you can find me in any of those channels, and would love to be in conversation with anyone. I'm very chatty when I'm not in my introverted shell. So yeah.
I never would have, from our conversation, never would have guessed introversion, but
Oh, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah.
also, yes, also that. So many things. Well, again, Jess, thank you for everything. And I'm going to include Jess's information in the show notes so that you can link directly to her. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Courage Permission Slip. If you enjoyed this episode and you found us on YouTube, please make sure that you like this episode and subscribe so that you can be alerted when new episodes are available. Or if you are listening on your favorite podcast platform, please make sure that you rate and review so that others who are interested in this content, you can make it easy for them to find this as well. But until the next time, that's all for today. Join us on the next episode of Courage Permission Slip. Bye now.